I'm a 30-year-old female now. My mom, sister Sam, my sister's boyfriend Chris, my uncle Bruce, mom's brother, and my aunt Rhoda and I all went to the beach for about a week. My dad couldn't go because he had to work. Anyways, we rented this little beachfront house that had its own private in-ground swimming pool and direct access to the beach, which was nicely not so populated. Just the people that lived in the beach houses had access to it. I am assuming it was a private beach for that community. I was so glad that it had a pool because, quite frankly, the thought of getting into the ocean freaked me out, especially after Sam and Chris made me watch Jaws before we went, and then told me lots of horror stories of people getting bitten by sharks, stung by stingrays, or jellyfish and so on. Yeah, that was so not the right thing to do to a little 7-year-old kid. When we were at the beach, I pretty much just built loads of sandcastles and tried to dig a hole for China, and would only get in the water till it came up middle waist to my shins, and searched for hermit crabs. How Sam, Chris, and my uncle Bruce managed to still get in the water baffled me in my kid brain. I thought, why in the world would they want to go out that far and deep after seeing such a movie as Jaws, and take the risk of being bitten or stung? But oh well, it was their appendages on the line, not mine. While we were down there, when we weren't at the beach or pool, we did some shopping at the local malls. There were a lot of stores there that we didn't have here at home, so it was nice to see what they had to offer. However, like I said, I was a 7-year-old kid and couldn't care less about shopping. My thoughts were that if you've been to one clothing store, you've been to them all, and my mom, Sam, and Aunt Rhonda could have spent days shopping. During this time, I mostly hung out with Chris. He felt the same way I did about shopping habits. So we would spend our time at the arcade, ice cream shops, and checking out stores like Spencer's. In hindsight, that was probably not a great store to carry a young kid in either, but I wasn't going to say anything about it and get stuck being dragged from store to store with my mom, Sam, and Aunt Rhonda. One of my favorite things as a kid were gummy bears. They actually still are my favorite candy to this day. You give me gummy bears and it was like Christmas morning for me. So on one particular shopping trip to this huge mall, my mom, Sam, and Aunt Rhonda drug us too. My mom bought me a bag of gummy bears to make up for their excessive shopping. In this mall, they had this booth store where you could design your own shirt, and they would airbrush the design on, so Chris decided to get him, Sam, and I a shirt made to commemorate our trip to the beach. While he was at the booth thing, my mom, Sam, and Aunt Rhonda were at a clothing store directly in front of the booth, and little sitting area next to the fountain in the middle of the mall. My uncle Bruce wandered to some sporting goods store to check out fishing gear. My mom told me to stick with Chris since I didn't want to go in the store with them, so I said okay. It was taking a while for Chris to get our shirts made. There were a few people ahead of us and he was having a hard time deciding on which design he wanted, while my sister and I had already picked ours out. I was getting tired of standing and asked Chris if it would be alright if I go sit on the empty bench right in front of the shirt booth store and eat my gummy bears. From where he was standing, he had a constant direct view of me at all times, so he said it would be okay and just not to move from that spot unless I was coming back to stand next to him. I agreed, and off I went to eat my delicious gummy bears. I was sitting there for about 5 minutes, chomping away, staring at the water fountain. when 5 guys came and sat on the empty benches in front of me, and the ones to my left and right. They had me surrounded. These guys were in their late teens to early 20s. They looked like your average teenage kids. They all had skateboards and had that rebellious punk style to them. At first they didn't bother me, nor did their presence. I, being a kid, assumed they were kids too, just a lot older than myself. After a few minutes of sitting there, they began to make me feel very uneasy. They weren't saying anything to each other, but they were giving each other looks while looking at me, as if they were sending codes to each other or something. They were all staring at me and snickering. At first I thought, what, do I have gummy bear stuff on my face or shirt? But it wasn't that at all. They were leering at me, as if I was some prize or something. I could see Chris looking at me very closely. I could tell that they made him very uncomfortable too, with how they were acting. Then one of them clears his throat and says, "Hey little girl, what's your name?" Immediately my mom's words came to mind. Don't talk to strangers, so I ignore them. Then another one says, "You don't want to tell us your name? You scared or something?" I say, "My mom told me not to talk to strangers. Y'all are strangers, so I can't talk to you." After that he says, "We're not strangers. We're just kids like you, so you can talk to us." In my mind, I was kind of conflicted about this because, like I said, they were young and kid-like. It was really confusing me, and even though they gave me a weird vibe, I figured what would be the harm in telling them my name, and maybe, if I did, they would leave me alone. So I said that my name is IB Blue Devil. Then another guy with longer hair said, "Wow, that's a nice name. Do you like gummy bears?" I was obviously eating them, so I said, "Yes, they are my favorite candy ever." Then another guy asked me if they can have some of my gummy bears. By this time, I only had like a few left, so I told him that I was sorry, but I didn't have enough to share with them all, and it wouldn't be fair to give some of them gummy bears and not the others. At hearing this, another guy speaks up. At this point, this is the first time he has spoken to me, and just by his attitude and the way the others acted, I could tell he was sort of like the leader of their group. He says, "No problem, Ivy Blue Devil. Why don't you just come with us? There's a candy store right around the corner, and we'll buy you a brand new bag, and then you can share with all of us." At this point, alarm bells are going off in my head, and there was no way in hell I was going with them anywhere, gummy bears or not. I didn't know what to do. They were literally surrounding me, so that I would have to walk past any one of them to leave the area, and if they decided they wanted to, they could grab me. The leader guy speaks again and stands up and puts his hand out to me and says, "So what do you say, IB Blue Devil? Won't you come with us to the candy store? We'll bring you right back. Your mom won't even know you're gone." Yeah, creeps. That's what I'm freaking worried about. But at this moment, they didn't know that Chris was keeping an eye on me the whole entire time. They just assumed I was waiting for my mom or whomever was in the stores on either side of the sitting area. Though Chris could see me, he was out of earshot and couldn't hear what they were saying to me. And when the dude stood up and got closer to me, he became on high guard and was at the ready to attack if need be. I looked right at Chris and gave him my most desperate help me look I could muster, and he marched right over there in ready to whoop ass mode and asked, "Is there a problem here?" The leader guy said, "Oh man, no problem. We were just talking about gummy bears and asked her if she was having fun at the beach and stuff." What a liar. Yes, they asked me about gummy bears, but nothing about me having fun at the beach and stuff. Then Chris asked me, "Is that true?" So I told him they were trying to get me to go with them to a candy store around the corner to buy more gummy bears to share with them. Obviously, this didn't jive well with Chris. If they had money to buy their own gummy bears, then why in the hell did they need me to go with them? So he told them, "Look, I don't know what the hell your game or deal is, but I have a pretty good idea. Just leave her alone, don't talk to her, or look at her, and better yet, why don't you and your goons get lost and go buy your own damn gummy bears?" Chris then picked me up and walked to the shirt booth, picked up his bag of shirts and walked into the clothing store where my mom, Sam, and Aunt Rhonda were still shopping, and filled them in on what just occurred. They finished up their shopping, as it was almost lunchtime, and we went to find Uncle Bruce, and left. I didn't see those guys again, and I still shudder to think just what they were gonna do to me had they gotten me to go with them and alone. I'm so glad my mom instilled enough stranger danger in me to do some good, and I'm especially grateful to Chris. He was my superhero in this situation. He always thought of me as his little sister and was super protective of me like a big brother. So to the 5 guys who tried to lure me away with the promise of more gummy bears, I hope you never try that on another more naive kid, and that you all got caught or locked up. And I didn't need your damn gummy bears because Chris bought me a huge bag of them later on that day. Two, to get a full grasp on what happened to me, you will need some information about the setting that it took place in and the situation. When I was in about 2nd grade, I went to an old, pretty poor school in northern Illinois that had a gigantic wooden playground built before it lost most of its funding. You know the types of playgrounds that make white suburban soccer moms go into conniptions with its exposed wood, ripe with splinters, thousands of wasp nests, tiny areas hidden underneath the main scaffolding, and rusty nails and chains galore. Needless to say, we kids loved it. And even the high schoolers would come and play on the massive structure when the little ones weren't there. There were always kids of all ages there at all times. What made this playground even better was a large thicketed area that the local kids collectively called the brush. It was an expanse of low, dense shrubbery that had grown into an unimaginable bramble that instantly swallowed anyone who was able to crawl inside. We kids loved it. And over the years, a maze of little hobbit-sized trails had been worn into the brush from children crawling in and out and breaking off branches to create miniature clearings with alcoves to hold secret club meetings and play jungle. The brush was absolutely impenetrable to all but the most determined and flexible adults, and made us kids feel like big shit when we managed to sneak past the recess aides and dive into it. Unfortunately for the rookie teachers and aides, they were usually the ones sentenced to go fetch little pricks like us when we snuck in and refused to come out. At the time, I thought the only reason the adults were so determined to keep us out of the brush was simply the fact that we could go hide in there and sneak around. I was too young to understand that the weird plunger things and white floppy tubes were at the deepest part of the brush. I soon found out, however, that syringes and used condoms weren't the only thing I should have been afraid of. Now, even more backstory. In 2nd grade, I was lucky enough to live right across the street from the big wooden playground and the thicket. Our house was an ugly brown 2-story with a small lawn. At the front of the lawn, we had a tree I climbed all the time, and a tire swing that I played on constantly. Our neighborhood was full of older people and young families, and very quiet. So during the summer months, my mom and dad would take the dog, as well as my little brother and I, on walks around the neighborhood after dinner. Probably to tire us out so we would go the fuck to sleep. On the last 2 blocks of our circuit around the neighborhood, I would always ask my mom and dad if I could run ahead and play on the tire swing while they slowly strolled around the corner and made their way back. They usually agreed to this only if they could see me in the yard from where they were walking, and I would sprint down the road as fast as my shrimpy little legs would carry me, and play on the swing for about 5 to 10 minutes until they made it up the driveway into the front door. One day I must have been extra hyper and obnoxious when I asked my parents to let me run ahead and play in the swing. Even though we had much farther to go than usual, they let me go ahead. As we were behind the corner where you would turn to go down our street, I cut across a couple neighbors' lawns to get to our front yard and started playing away. I hadn't been in our front yard very long when I heard a man's voice call, "Hey," a couple times. I looked over to see a man in a white shirt and cargo pants in the front edge of the brush. He was still behind some of the shorter shrubs and had obviously popped out of the thicket. I wasn't used to grown-ass men trying to talk to me, and paused on the swing to look at him, pretty confused. "Hey," he said, looking up and down the street. "Hey, do you want to come play with me?" He didn't come closer, staying behind the small shrubs, and his shoulders were hunched in a way that made it look like he was trying to fold in on himself. Now, I was a pretty stupid little kid, but stranger danger was being pushed pretty damn hard in the schools and in the community at the time. So I even knew this behavior was absolutely inappropriate and weird for someone who appeared to be 30 and hiding in the bushes in front of my house. Nevertheless, I tried to be polite and called back, "No thank you, I'm okay," to the stranger. I had stopped playing at this point and stood on the top of the tire swing, staring at the man who hadn't budged. I was a very sociable kid and liked people. I was known for running up to people I didn't know and striking up conversations with them, much to the terror and worry of my parents. However, something about this guy made me uneasy. I was only 8, but this was the first time that a man made me feel scared, for a reason that I wouldn't have words for until I was much older. I didn't want to go near him. I didn't want him to see me, and I wanted my family to hurry up and come home. But they were still about a block from turning the corner to our street. The man shuffled behind the shrubs and looked behind him and to the left, and then turned back to me. "Please," he begged, balling his hands up and pulling them up to his chest in a bastardization of what young toddlers do when they don't get their way. "Please come over here and play. We'll have lots of fun." He looked fitfully up and down the street as soon as he finished saying this, moving jerkily and visibly more nervous. I had had enough, and my stranger danger sirens were blaring at full blast. Our house was locked up since we were out and I couldn't get inside. I remember a distinct feeling of wanting to be out of reach. Not just farther away, I wanted to be somewhere where this man couldn't get to me, no matter how hard he tried. Without any more hesitation, I scrambled up the knotted rope of the tire swing, up into the tree. Once I reached the first branch, I called out to the man and said, "My mom and dad say I can't play with strangers, I'm sorry." Then scrambled up a couple more branches. Besides, they're coming home soon, and I have to go to bed. The man became even more fidgety. "Where are your mommy and daddy?" he asked. "It's okay to come play for just a little bit." I didn't answer, concentrating on climbing higher. I was now at a pretty significant height in the tree, and at a level where the branches would have snapped under anything heavier than a tiny 8-year-old girl. I looked back at the man, now at a vantage point where I had a bird's eye view of him and his surroundings, and saw something that made me go into silent hysterics. Behind the man in white was another man. They were about the same age, but this man was dressed in a khaki green shirt and brown pants and crouched behind the same bush that the man in white had popped up from, only now visible from my new vantage point. I remember the scene so clearly. The man in green was in a stance like a football, ready to tackle, or a baseball player ready to catch a low ball. What made me so absolutely frightened was the fact that he was holding a large cream-colored pillowcase with both hands. I knew these were bad men, and they wanted to take me away from my family and home. I was close to a screaming, crying meltdown, and told the man in white again that I wasn't going to play with him. I remember my throat was tight and I was looking around for any adult I knew in the hopes that I could tell them what was happening. To my absolute relief, I saw my mom, dad, little brother and our pit bull mix round the corner and begin to head down our street, right toward me in the creeps. I pointed with my skinny, pasty little arm and began telling the man in white that my family was coming now, right now, and that we were going to go inside. The man didn't believe me and continued to try to coerce me to come down and play in the same way he had before, only with more looking behind and to the side at the crouching man. Finally, the man in white spotted my family about 3 blocks away and jumped, obviously kicking into panic mode. "Please, you have to come here," he begged, taking half a step forward in the brush. The crouching man said something that made the man in white stop, and he looked desperately back at me. They both looked at my approaching family and silently ducked into the bushes, clambering into the thicket where I couldn't see them anymore. When my parents were close enough, I clambered down and immediately tried to tell them what happened. Unfortunately, though, since I was a little bitty thing, I have the weird reaction of hysterically giggling and laughing when I'm scared out of my freaking mind. It's an absolute horrible reflex that makes me look like a psycho to this day. Since I was laughing like a crazy person and jumping around with nervous energy, my parents assumed the story was some sort of weird story about an imaginary friend. I had a lot of those. Or I was talking about a cartoon I saw earlier. I tried insisting it was real that night and the next day, but my parents refused to believe me and told me to hush or I'd get in trouble. My parents rarely believed me when I told them things, and still don't to this day. I put the incident away in my mind from that point on. I never saw the 2 men again nor heard about them anymore. However, about 2 years later the brush was torn up, and the remnants were burnt to the ground by the school with no explanation given to us kids. My family moved away from that house when I was in 5th grade. Then moved out of state when I was in 7th. When I was 16, and our family was eating dinner together, something prompted me to tell the story again. My parents stopped eating and looked at each other in horror, and my mother quietly asked me if I was seriously telling the truth. I exasperatedly assured them that I was, and jokingly said I was pretty close to ending up on a milk carton. I regret saying that, because I could see both my parents' faces turn white and then realized, fully, how close they had been to losing their only daughter all those years ago. So, creepy men in the brush, let's not meet again. 3. Okay, so this happened to 3 friends and I when we were all around 15. We had just arrived at my one friend's house after spending a couple hours at one of those trampolining jump places. We got to his house at around 9, and it was already pretty dark, but that was okay because we were all sleeping over. Being extremely energetic teenagers, we decided to go out for a walk soon after getting home, and off we went. Keeping in mind it was still very dark with only the small illumination of a street lamp here and there. We got to the end of his neighborhood and cut through a small field to get to another neighborhood next to his. Once on this neighborhood, we were determined to pick a random house and ding-dong ditch it. If anyone isn't familiar with the phrase ding-dong ditch, it is basically running up to someone's house, ringing the doorbell, and then running away before they open the door. Anyway, the second neighborhood was basically one long street. We were walking on with almost an immediate left turn that went a little ways before ending in a cul-de-sac. We took the immediate left turn and decided on the very first house in the street. When we finally got the nerve to run up and ring the bell, my friend in the front, who was supposed to ring it, choked and knocked really loudly instead. Nevertheless, we ran anyways. Though upon arriving on the original long street, we did not turn right, which led towards the field and eventually my friend's house. No. Instead, and I still wonder why we did this, for it was our biggest mistake, we turned left down the long road to which we could not see an end to. After jogging for a good 30 seconds, our group slowed to a walking pace and began laughing at our accomplishment and playfully teasing the one friend who had knocked instead of ringing the doorbell. Though our laughter was cut short when one of my friends asked aloud, "Is someone chasing us?" Everyone whipped their heads back, including myself, and sure enough, only about 100 yards away, there was a figure running straight towards us. We had come to a halt, and were all looking back at the hard to make out but surely human adult running towards us. At first, I had thought it was just some jogger out for a late night run. But that idea quickly vanished when I heard his voice pierce through the silent night. It was the voice of a woman, maybe in her 20s or 30s, screaming directly at us, "Hey, get over here!" My friends and I bolted. I'd like to mention that I have asthma, which causes me to have trouble breathing during extreme physical exercise if I don't use my inhaler beforehand. And that night, I had forgotten my inhaler at home. My friends and I all ran extremely fast, not sure who was chasing us or why. We just all knew we needed to get as far away as possible so she wouldn't call the cops on us. We finally got to the end of the long road after about 2 minutes of running to find ourselves at a dead end. There was only some woods ahead of us and a mysterious woman closing in from behind. This is when we realized how stupid it had been to not have taken a right after knocking on her door, for if we had, we would have been home free. Now getting back to my friend's house was going to be a lot harder. We decided to cut through someone's lawn and hide behind their house in a row of trees. We were all wearing dark hoodies so we couldn't be easily spotted. But we had a clear view of the road we had just come from. My plan was to watch the road and wait for her to pass, then sneak behind her and run all the way back to the house. My friends agreed and we waited in suspenseful silence. We only stayed there for about 1 minute because somewhere in the exact backyard we were in, we heard the woman yell, "You gonna come out, or are you just gonna hide?" We then sprinted back to the road and began our way down the long street back to the field so that we could get to the house. We were running so fast that I could feel my chest begin to hurt from my asthma, and breathing became more difficult, but I managed to keep going. Just as we were about to pass the house we ding-dong ditched, I thought we were in the clear. My heart sank as I saw 3 figures in the street next to the house. As I recall, there were 2 more women and 1 man, all probably in their 30s. But I didn't get a very good look at them because it was dark and we were running so fast. One of the women called out to us, "What are you guys doing?" To which my friend responded, "Oh, we're just going on a run." I thought this was very funny and I even smiled, but once again, my smile was wiped clean away when I saw the man pull out what looked to be a knife. Whatever asthma symptoms I had been experiencing before vanished in an instant as I began running even faster than before. I assumed my friends had seen it too, for they had all picked up the pace as well. We ran all the way home, and the thing that probably urged me to go the fastest, even more so than the knife, was the sick calling noises they made after us as we fled down the road. I couldn't tell if it was yelling or strange laughing, but whatever it was, it chills me to think about even to this day. We all made it home safely and no cops came around the neighborhood questioning people either. But since then I haven't ding-dong ditched anyone, and I will probably never again.